Bet that Kane's seen more action than he ever has. Someone chuckled from the crowd, not even bothering to whisper. Laughter followed, quick, dismissive, but the old man didn't look back. He just kept walking, each tap of his cane striking the pavement like a ticking clock. Step, tap, step, tap. The crowd was cheering until the man with the cane stepped forward. He wasn't on the program. He never asked for applause. But when the general spotted him, everything stopped. "Captain Mercer?" Silence rolled through the square like thunder before the storm. Then came the wave. Cheers, gasps, salutes, as the town realized who they had just mocked. It was the loudest ovation Havenbrook had ever heard. Havenbrook wasn't on most maps. If you blinked on the county road, you'd miss the crooked wooden sign by the overgrown hedgerow that simply read, "Welcome to Havenbrook, founded 1864. And frankly, most folks were just fine with that. It was the kind of town where autumn didn't need a tourist brochure. The maple trees lit up the main street in amber and gold, like an old photograph coming to life. And the air always smelled faintly of wood smoke and riverstone. There was a church that still rang its bell by hand, a barber who only worked Tuesdays and Fridays, and a radio station that played more static than songs. Nestled on the corner of Oak and Main sat the Red Fern Cafe, its red awning permanently faded by years of summer sun and snowstorms. Inside, the wallpaper curled at the edges, like paper from a forgotten book, and the old ceiling fan turned lazily above checkered tables. But the coffee, strong enough to wake a ghost. And the biscuits, legendary enough to bring back anyone who'd left town behind. Rachel Flynn stood behind the counter most mornings, apron dusted with flour, short auburn hair tucked behind one ear, and sleeves rolled high on her forearms. She hadn't always been the one pouring coffee. Not too long ago, she had been the woman asking the hard questions in courtroom hallways and on radio airwaves in the city. But burnout is a quiet kind of fire, and eventually it had scorched her so badly that she'd packed up everything and driven until the traffic disappeared. That road ended in Havenbrook. She didn't talk much about the old job, not even to Missy, the cafe's sharp-tongued waitress, who'd worked there since before Rachel was born. Missy had eyes like a hawk and the mouth of a sailor's widow, quick with a refill and quicker with a comeback. Her banter with old Nate, a former high school shop teacher who now considered the cafe his second home, was half the entertainment most mornings. "Missy, this coffee's so strong, I think I just grew a third eyebrow," Nate muttered one morning, peering into his mug. "That's your conscience catching up to you," she replied without looking up, pouring him another half cup anyway. The regulars laughed softly. In Havenbrook, humor came slow and dry, like rain after a long drought. But even in a town where nothing much changed, people noticed him. Harold Mercer. He always entered around 7:42 a.m. Rain or shine, coat buttoned to the top, his cane tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm as he walked toward the back booth by the window. The cane looked like it had seen battle, its surface scarred, the rubber tip worn near to splitting. But what drew Rachel's eyes every time was how still he was once he sat down, like a photograph that refused to fade. He never ordered, just sat quietly until Missy brought him a black coffee. No sugar, no cream, no words. He would place a few bills on the edge of the table, always exact, always cash. Then he'd stare out the window at the town square, as if waiting for something that never came. Some thought he was just a drifter who'd gotten stuck in Havenbrook, too proud to leave, too quiet to explain. Others whispered, mostly after their third refill, that he was ex-military, a man who'd seen too much and said too little. But no one dared ask. Not even Nate. And Nate had opinions on everything from soup recipes to the U.S. Constitution. Rachel had tried once. Just a nod, a polite hello. He'd met her eyes, blue, piercing, like winter water, but said nothing. That had been enough. Since then, she just watched, observed. The old habits of a journalist didn't die easily. And Harold Mercer? He was the kind of man her instincts were trained for. One morning, as the town yawned into the first week of November and frost clung stubbornly to the window panes, Rachel noticed something odd. As Harold sat down, he placed something beside his coffee, a folded napkin, creased and pressed into the perfect shape of a five-pointed star. He left it behind when he rose. Rachel picked it up gently, examined the folds. Not random, intentional, precise. That night, she wrote in her notebook for the first time in months. There's something about the way he sits, like he's holding up a story too heavy for words. Something in the rhythm of that cane. Something I've seen before. In courtrooms, in war veterans, in mothers waiting outside hospital doors. Stillness isn't always silence. Sometimes it's armor. Harold Mercer had become part of Havenbrook without anyone inviting him in. And yet there he was, every morning, same table, same coffee, same ghost of a story written in how he carried himself. A story Rachel Flynn was now determined to read between the lines. Every town has its rhythms. In Havenbrook, it wasn't the church bell or the morning freight train that set the pace. It was the sound of Harold Mercer's cane. Tap, tap, tap. Every morning without fail, around 7:42 a.m., he appeared at the door of the Redfern Cafe. Rachel Flynn had come to anticipate it like clockwork. The soft creak of the cafe door, the low whoosh of cold air following him in, and then the pause. Always a moment where Harold seemed to take the room in silently, though his eyes rarely moved. He walked with measured slowness, not from weakness but deliberation, as if each step had weight and memory. His cane, scuffed, wooden, with a worn leather grip, tapped 3 times before each stop. Then he would arrive at his booth, the corner one with the best view of the square. Always that booth, always facing the same direction. Missy didn't ask for his order anymore. A cup of plain black coffee arrived within minutes, set down without a word. He would nod, just once, barely perceptible, and then he'd stare through the window, lost in a landscape no one else could see. Rachel, for all her efforts not to seem obvious, had developed a habit of watching him from behind the bakery case. He never fidgeted, never checked a phone, never unfolded a newspaper. His hands rested calmly in front of him, one occasionally adjusting the cup, the other steady on the table's edge, fingers bent slightly from age or injury. She noticed little things, the way he always smoothed the napkin before placing it under his cup, how he would fold the sugar packet, even though he never used it, into a neat triangle and then press it flat with his thumb. Some mornings he would pull something from his coat, a small square of paper, or a handkerchief, or once, a silver coin he turned over in his palm for 10 solid minutes. Then he'd tuck it back away like it had said everything he needed. The rest of the cafe buzzed around him in its usual small-town choreography. Old Nate grumbled about taxes and the weather, claiming both were part of the same government plot. Missy refilled cups with an arched brow and an endless supply of sass. Truck drivers came through for a quick breakfast. Local kids ran in with library books and sticky fingers. The bell above the door never stayed quiet for long. But Harold Mercer, he was an island inside it all. Still, silent, unbothered. And then one morning, Benji appeared. 9 years old, with skinned knees and a mop of messy brown hair. Benji was a regular when school was out. His mother worked overnights at the hospital, and the cafe had unofficially become his morning stop before school. Rachel had set up a little corner table just for him near the window, stocked with crayons, paper, and the occasional blueberry muffin when tips were good. That morning, Benji walked in, gave Rachel a sleepy smile, and plopped into his seat with dramatic flair. He scanned the room once, eyes landing on Harold. "Why's he always sit there?" he asked, leaning across the counter. Rachel gave a quiet shrug. "That's his spot." Benji squinted. "He looks like a statue, like he's guarding something." Rachel blinked. That wasn't far off. Benji didn't wait for more. He grabbed a crayon and began sketching, tongue poking out from the corner of his mouth in deep concentration. Within 10 minutes, he held up the picture, a rough but unmistakable drawing of Harold Mercer at his booth, cane propped beside him, coffee cup steaming. Rachel stifled a smile. "That's really good, Benj. I'm going to give it to him," he said. Before Rachel could stop him, the boy hopped down, picture in hand, and marched to the back booth. Harold looked up, and for a moment, his face didn't change. Then his eyes fell on the drawing. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on the paper, longer than anything else in the cafe ever held him. Benji hesitated. You can keep it if you want, he offered. Harold's fingers moved slowly, taking the paper with unexpected gentleness. He gave a short nod, then tapped the table twice. Benji grinned and ran back to his corner. From behind the counter, Rachel watched the exchange with quiet awe. For the first time in months, Harold Mercer seemed present, as if someone had reached through the armor and knocked just once to remind him the world still saw him. He didn't leave the drawing on the table. He folded it carefully, too carefully for something he didn't care about, and slipped it into his coat pocket. The next morning, Rachel found a napkin on her counter, folded into the same exact shape Benji had drawn. A quiet thank you, not spoken, but felt. And from that day on, every time Benji came in, Harold Mercer's eyes followed the boy for just a moment longer than usual. Something had shifted, and Rachel felt it in her bones. This was not just an old man with a cane. The napkin stars kept coming. Every few mornings, Rachel would find one left neatly by the register, always perfectly folded, always silent. It became their unspoken language. Harold never said thank you. He didn't have to. But Rachel's curiosity only deepened. There was something about the way he moved. Too careful, too trained. She'd seen that kind of posture before, in combat veterans testifying in hearings back when she covered courtrooms and defense cases. The stillness, the scanning eyes that never seemed to move. The edge of discipline never truly retired. One foggy Thursday, Rachel couldn't help herself. After the breakfast rush had settled, she pulled out the town archives binder Missy kept behind the counter. Old menus, newspaper clippings, cafe trivia, and flipped to the obituaries and service records. No mention of a Harold Mercer. Not in the war memorial pages, not in town birth records, not even in the church registry from the last 20 years. That night after closing, she opened her laptop and did what she hadn't done in a long time: investigative digging. Nothing came up under Harold Mercer and Havenbrook. No service records, no veteran registries, no published articles or social links. The silence was louder than a denial. It was a gap, a removed thread. The next day, during her afternoon walk past the town square, she decided to try someone who knew every hidden corner of Havenbrook, Mr. Lennox, the retired town librarian. Lennox lived in a yellowing house on Ash Street with overflowing bookcases, visible through the windows, and a cat that answered to Captain. Rachel knocked, and the door creaked open after a moment. "Miss Flynn," he said, blinking through thick bifocals. "The smell of flour gives you away." "I need your help with a name," she said, holding her notebook. "Do you know anything about a man named Harold Mercer?" The librarian's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Depends who's asking." "Let's say a baker who used to be a reporter." He stepped aside. "Then I suppose you'd better come in." Inside, the house smelled of old pages and lemon polish. Lennox moved with the slow confidence of someone who never rushed, but always arrived on time. Rachel explained what she'd seen: Harold's routine, his silence, the napkin stars, and the missing records. Lennox listened without interrupting. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he finally said. "And when I did, it wasn't in a library book." "Was he military?" "Oh yes, but not just military. He wasn't ordinary Army, not Navy either. The kind of man who answered phones that didn't ring publicly." "Classified?" she asked. Lennox nodded slowly. "He used to train others. Special operations, from what I gathered. When I was on the Veterans Committee back in the 80s, there were whispers. Someone referred to him as the Shepherd. Never saw his name listed on local rolls again after 1975. It just vanished." Rachel frowned. "So you're saying he erased himself?" "No, I'm saying someone helped him do it." Before she left, Lennox handed her a tattered file folder from a filing cabinet by the door. "This belonged to a friend of mine who used to run the town paper. Thought you might find it interesting." Back at the bakery after the ovens were off and the cafe dark, Rachel opened the folder. There it was, a clipped headline from the Havenbrook Herald, dated July 17, 1973. "Captain H. Mercer awarded Medal for Bravery. Rescue in Highlands saves 6. The article was short, grainy black and white photo, his face barely visible under a helmet, but the posture was unmistakable, even blurred, even faded by time. That was him. That was Harold Mercer. She read the paragraph twice. Captain H. Mercer, age undisclosed, was recognized for acts of valor following a rescue operation during a nighttime ambush in the Central Highlands. Reports say he carried multiple wounded soldiers to safety under fire and refused extraction until all personnel were accounted for. No mention of where he was from, no interviews, no follow-up. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she placed the clipping on the counter. This man had walked into her cafe for months, folded napkins, drank his coffee, sat in silence, and no one knew. Not Missy, not Nate, not even the flag-waving veterans who gathered every Tuesday afternoon to complain about gas prices and swap war stories. He had never once tried to be noticed, and now she understood why. The next morning, Rachel placed the folded newspaper clipping into a clean envelope and tucked it under Harold's coffee cup. He didn't react when he saw it, just slid the envelope into his coat pocket and gave her that same quiet nod. But when he left, a new napkin star sat on the counter, folded tighter than the others. Underneath it, in sharp block letters, "You ask the right questions." Rachel stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. Something was beginning, and she wasn't backing away. Veterans Day arrived on a breath of frost and stillness. In the town of Havenbrook, the streets shimmered faintly with dew, and a soft mist curled along the sidewalks like an old soldier rising from sleep. American flags hung from every lamppost, waving gently in the breeze, and folding chairs lined the town square in tight rows, many already filled by bundled elders gripping thermoses and canes, their faces a patchwork of memory and time. The square hummed with quiet anticipation. The brass band tuned their instruments near the gazebo. Scouts handed out miniature flags, and children, jittery in thick coats, practiced their salute and march under the stern watch of their school teachers. At the Red Fern Cafe, Rachel Flynn stood behind the counter, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. She watched the square through the window, her eyes searching, but the corner booth was empty. Harold Mercer hadn't come in. Not for coffee, not for a napkin star, not even a glance. She'd checked twice. Missy had said nothing, but the fact that she left Harold's usual cup by the machine, just in case, told Rachel everything. Rachel adjusted her scarf and stepped outside. She joined the townspeople along the sidewalks and scanned the gathering. Still no sign. By 10 o'clock, the MC, a short man with a booming voice, announced the start of the parade. A rusted green Jeep rolled forward, its driver a World War II veteran in a hat far too large for his head. Applause followed in waves. Rachel stood near Benji, who held his school's banner with both hands, lips pressed tight in concentration. He looked up at her and whispered, "Is he coming?" "I don't know," Rachel replied, and for the first time, she truly didn't. Then came the local ROTC students, marching with uneven rhythm but full hearts. The town applauded. Rachel tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting. She thought of the napkins, of Harold's silence, of the envelope she'd left him containing that 1973 newspaper clipping. She thought of his eyes the day he took it. He hadn't said a word, but something in his face shifted. A recognition, not of her, but of time catching up. And then, just as the marching band began their rendition of God Bless America, Rachel saw him. He stood beneath the old elm tree at the far end of the square. Same dark overcoat, same flat cap. The cane rested beside him like an old comrade. He didn't push through the crowd. He didn't wave. He simply watched, calm, motionless, and somehow commanding, despite saying nothing. Rachel's breath caught, and someone else noticed too. From the steps of the gazebo, General Douglas Keene, retired and visiting from the Capitol for the day, squinted toward the tree line. His speech was in his hand, but he didn't read it. His posture straightened. His mouth opened slowly. "Captain Mercer?" he said, not into the mic but aloud, voice clear, unmistakable. The square froze. Rachel felt the air shift. The music faltered. The drummers paused mid-beat. Benji turned, eyes wide. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What did he say?" Then louder, "Did he say Mercer?" And then the silence hit. Deep, heavy, reverent. Dozens of veterans turned in unison toward the elm tree. A few stood slowly. Others removed their hats. The flag stopped waving. Even the wind seemed to pause. Harold didn't move. He simply acknowledged the gaze of General Keene with the slightest nod. Rachel couldn't breathe. Keene stepped down from the gazebo. He crossed the path between the chairs slowly, as if approaching sacred ground. His metals glinted in the sun. When he reached Harold, he stopped short. "Sir," Keene said, voice thick now, "you saved 6 of us that night, 1972, near Docto. You dragged me from a ditch after I was hit. I never saw you again. Never forgot." Harold looked him in the eye, then raised his right hand in a crisp, exact salute. The general returned it, sharply. No ceremony, no speeches. Just 2 men, one carrying decades of silence, the other carrying the weight of finally speaking. And then it happened. The applause started from the back. 1 person, then 2, then 10. And suddenly the whole town was on its feet, clapping, cheering, crying. Veterans who had once dismissed him now stood with trembling hands and damp eyes. Children raised their flags higher. The brass band struck up the anthem again, this time louder, faster. Rachel's palms stung from how hard she clapped. She turned to Benji, who had dropped his banner and was waving both arms. A smile stretched across his entire face. The sound rolled across the square like thunder, like a salute finally being heard. For a brief moment, Rachel thought Harold might say something. A word, a gesture. But he didn't. He lowered his hand, gave one last look toward the crowd, then turned and walked away. No curtain call, no attention. Just the familiar tap, tap, tap of his cane fading into the crowd. Rachel felt her heart tighten as she watched him go. Not from sadness, but from knowing something had changed, not in him, but in all of them. That day, no one forgot the man who had stood among them in silence, because now they had finally seen him. By the next morning, Harold Mercer was gone. His usual booth at the Red Fern Cafe sat empty. No steaming cup of black coffee, no creased napkin, no sound of his cane tapping rhythmically across the linoleum. Rachel stood at the counter, arms folded tightly, eyes fixed on the chair he always chose. The sun filtered in through the windows, catching the motes of flour in the air. But the warmth didn't reach her. Missy was the first to say it out loud. "He left, didn't he?" she muttered, not needing an answer. Rachel just nodded. There was no goodbye, no note, no final star-shaped napkin. Just a silence where he used to be. A silence that now meant something entirely different. The town hadn't stopped talking since the parade. That moment, when General Keene stepped off the stage and called him Captain Mercer, had swept through Havenbrook like a river breaking a dam. By evening, folks who'd once barely looked at Harold were now quoting his name with reverence. Men who'd served in lesser-known wars called him a legend. Young parents told their kids, "You saw a real hero today." But Harold had slipped away quietly, like he'd never been there at all. A few days later, Rachel found herself on the porch steps of the bakery, an old sketch pad resting in her lap. Benji sat beside her, swinging his legs, a colored pencil tucked behind his ear. "I made something," he said, holding out a new drawing. It was of Harold, standing tall, coat fluttering slightly in the breeze, his cane grounded beside him, next to the war memorial where the folding chairs had already been stacked away. A small American flag flew just behind him. The man was alone but upright, proud, the way Benji had drawn him. It didn't feel sad. It felt permanent. Rachel didn't say anything at first. She just looked at the drawing for a long time before finally whispering, "Do you think he knew we'd remember him?" Benji gave a small shrug. "I think he hoped we'd see him. That's why I drew him in the first place." Rachel smiled, tears welling. "You saw him before the rest of us did." A week passed, then 2. Snow dusted the eaves of the cafe. The leaves had all fallen, and the wind carried that midwinter stillness through Havenbrook's narrow streets. Rachel kept working, baking in the early mornings, wiping down counters in the quiet evenings. But something had changed. People asked about him now. Travelers stopped in just to see the booth by the window. "Is this where the man with the cane used to sit?" they'd ask. Rachel finally gave the answer she knew felt right. "Yes, would you like to sit there?" One afternoon, she framed one of Benji's drawings and hung it above the booth. Beneath it, she placed a small plaque, hand-lettered in gold ink. "The quietest salute can echo forever." Locals called it the Hero's Table. 6 months later, Rachel opened the doors to her new business, the Warmth Bakery, rebuilt from the same bones as the Red Fern Cafe, but with one very intentional difference. A wall dedicated to Havenbrook's quiet servants. Photos, sketches, names, tributes. A small display case held folded napkin stars, laminated and preserved. At the center of it all was Harold's booth, left untouched except for a fresh cup of black coffee placed there each Veterans Day morning. On that first spring, after his disappearance, a woman came into the bakery with a cedar box. She looked to be in her 80s, white hair pinned tightly, a brooch shaped like a hawk at her collar. She said little, but she brought the box to Rachel with trembling hands. Inside was a folded flag and a medal, the ribbon faded, the metal cool and smooth in Rachel's palm. "I thought it belonged here more than anywhere else," the woman said. Rachel wanted to ask who she was, what she knew of Harold, but something about the way she spoke told her not to. Instead, she placed the box beneath the drawing, added a brass label, Medal of Valor, recipient unknown to most, remembered by all. And still, every few weeks, a napkin star would appear, left by no one, found by everyone. No one ever saw who left them. But Rachel had a feeling. Some things don't need to be explained. Some stories finish themselves, even if the hero disappears before the last chapter is written. Harold Mercer may have walked away that day without a word, but what he left behind echoes louder than most speeches ever could. In a time when so much of life is lived in noise, constant updates, endless headlines, voices competing to be heard, his silence reminded us of something deeply American, deeply human. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't need a podium to live with honor. There are Harold Mercers all around us. Veterans, quiet workers, caregivers, neighbors, men and women who go unnoticed, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've chosen humility over recognition. They've folded their pain into something quiet, something useful, and moved on. What would happen if we stopped to look a little closer? If we asked not to respond, but to truly understand? Would we find more silent heroes hiding in plain sight? Let us ask ourselves, who are we ignoring today that will honor too late tomorrow? This story isn't just about a man and his cane. It's about the unseen legacy each of us might carry, about the power of being present, being kind, and recognizing that a quiet life can still shake the world when people finally listen. And maybe, just maybe, Harold isn't gone at all. Maybe he's sitting in another cafe in another town, waiting for someone else to see him. If this story moved you, we invite you to reflect in the comments below. Have you ever met someone like Harold Mercer? What quiet acts of courage have you witnessed in your own community? Who are the silent heroes in your life? We read every word, and your voice matters. If you believe more people should hear stories like Harold's, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the strength behind silence. Thank you, especially to our senior viewers, veterans, and lifelong learners, for spending your time with us. Your wisdom, your perspective, and your stories deserve to be seen and heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never overlook the quiet ones.